Welcome back, everybody. Today we're tackling something pretty heavy, and I think a lot of us are still reeling from it, the passing of Liam Payne.
Yeah, it's been tough to process for sure.
It has. One Direction was such a phenomenon, and he was so young, only 31 when he died after falling from that hotel balcony in Argentina.
I know, and then those police reports suggesting substance use might have played a role.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot to unpack.
It is, and that's what we're here to do today, kind of dig into what we know and try to make sense of it all. You sent over some articles before we got started, and there's one from The Mirror that really stood out to me.
Oh yeah, which one?
It's the one that reveals Liam had checked into rehab just a few months before his death.
Oh, why?
And not just any rehab, the Priory in London.
The Priory, yeah.
That's a big deal, right?
Oh yeah.
£5,000 a night, that's what they're saying.
That's serious.
You don't go there unless you're serious about getting help.
No, you're right. The Priory, it's practically synonymous with celebrity rehab. It's known for its exclusivity, high-profile clientele. I mean, choosing a facility like that suggests Liam was ready to really tackle his struggles, don't you think?
It does, but here's the thing that threw me. The same article mentions he left the program after only 2 days.
2 days.
2 days. Sources say he barely left his room or interacted with anyone. I mean, I was surprised by that, given the cost and the reputation of the place. You'd think he'd give it more of a shot.
You would think, right. It's a good point, though. It brings up something really important about rehab, even at a top-tier facility like the Priory. It's not a quick fix, and relapse is unfortunately a common part of recovery.
So even checking into a place like the Priory isn't a guarantee?
Sadly, no. It's never that simple.
Yeah.
Addiction is such a complex process. So many factors are at play. Individual motivation, the support system around them, the nature of the addiction itself, it's rarely a straightforward path.
It makes you realize just how challenging this is. The Mirror article also mentioned Liam was using prescription medication during this time provided by doctors. What would that entail in this context?
That likely refers to medically assisted detox. It's basically using medication to manage withdrawal symptoms and cravings that come with quitting certain substances.
Makes sense.
It can make detox less agonizing both physically and mentally, but it's critical that it's done under strict medical supervision because there's always a potential for misuse or developing a dependence on the medication itself.
It sounds like a delicate balance, needing those meds to get through detox, but also having to be incredibly careful with them.
It is a tough balance. And then you bring up the police report mentioning Liam's hotel room being in disarray with a whiskey bottle present. Given what we've discussed, it's hard not to wonder if there's a connection.
Yeah, it's tough not to.
It is. We do have to be cautious about drawing conclusions, though, as the investigation is still underway. But we do know that substance use can cloud judgment and increase the likelihood of impulsive or risky behavior. It can lower inhibitions, lead to actions someone wouldn't typically take when sober.
It's just a reminder that even with the best intentions and efforts, this disease can have tragic consequences.
Yeah, for sure. And it brings us back to the immense grief surrounding Liam's death. I mean, there's been an outpouring of tributes from his family, friends, colleagues. His mother's statement simply saying, "I've lost my beautiful boy." It's heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. It speaks to the deep personal loss beyond the headlines. Simon Cowell, Liam's former manager, also shared a moving tribute highlighting his kindness, humor, and talent. It just really underscores the multifaceted impact Liam had on those who knew him. It's just so important to remember that addiction doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
There are often broader societal factors that contribute to its development.
Yeah, especially in cases like Liam's, where you have the added layer of fame and everything that comes with that. What are some of those bigger picture issues that we need to consider?
Well, one factor that often comes up is this immense pressure to succeed, particularly in high-pressure industries like the music business. And when you factor in achieving fame at such a young age like Liam did with One Direction, it creates a whole other level of complexity.
I can only imagine. The constant scrutiny, the relentless schedules, the need to maintain a certain image, all while you're basically still growing up. It's got to be a lot to handle.
It is. It's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone so young. That kind of pressure cooker environment can be incredibly difficult to navigate, even for adults with years of experience. And for someone like Liam, who has essentially went from teenager to global superstar practically overnight.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. It really makes those tributes about his kindness and humor even more striking.
Yeah.
To maintain those qualities under that kind of pressure, it speaks volumes about his character.
It does. But we can't forget the dark side of that world either. The accessibility of drugs and alcohol, particularly in those circles that can't be ignored.
Absolutely. Substance use is often glamorized in the entertainment industry, which makes it even harder to resist for someone already feeling vulnerable or under immense pressure.
It's like a perfect storm, isn't it? You've got this young person thrust into this intense high-pressure environment, surrounded by temptation, potentially lacking the coping mechanisms or support systems to navigate it all healthily.
And it's crucial to remember that addiction is a disease, not a choice. It's not about weakness or a lack of willpower.
Right.
There's a complex interplay of genetic, environmental, and social factors at work. It's a medical condition that requires understanding and treatment, not judgment.
You mentioned genetic factors, and that makes me think about something else from those articles. Liam had spoken openly about his struggles with mental health in the past, specifically anxiety and depression. Could there be a link between those conditions and substance use?
There often is. A lot of individuals with mental health disorders, they may turn to drugs or alcohol as a way to self-medicate or numb their emotional pain. It's not a healthy coping mechanism, of course, but it's often a desperate attempt to deal with overwhelming feelings they might not have the tools to address in healthier ways.
So it's not just about addressing the addiction itself, but also looking at any underlying mental health issues that might be fueling it.
Right. It needs to be a multi-pronged approach.
Which brings up a broader point. We need to be having more open and honest conversations about mental health in general and how it intersects with substance use.
I couldn't agree more. We need to break down the stigma surrounding mental health and create a culture where people feel comfortable seeking help without fearing judgment. It needs to be as acceptable to seek help for emotional distress as it is for a physical ailment.
Absolutely. We've talked about the pressure of fame, the accessibility of substances, and the link between mental health and addiction. What about access to treatment? The priority is obviously on the extreme end of the spectrum, but what about everyone else?
That's a huge issue. The cost of rehab can be prohibitive for a lot of people, and insurance coverage for addiction treatment is often inadequate. And even when affordable options do exist, there can be long waiting lists or a shortage of qualified providers. It's a systemic problem that needs urgent attention.
So where do we go from here? What can we as individuals do to make a difference in this fight against addiction?
Well, for starters, we can educate ourselves and others about the nature of addiction. Understanding that it's a disease, not a moral failing, and that recovery is possible with the right support.
It's about challenging those misconceptions and stereotypes, right? And advocating for better access to treatment and resources.
Exactly. We can support organizations that are dedicated to research, prevention, and treatment of substance use disorders. And we can contact our elected officials to push for policies that prioritize mental health and addiction services.
It sounds like a multifaceted approach is needed both on an individual and societal level. We've been talking a lot about treatment, but what about prevention? What can be done to help young people, especially those who might be at higher risk for addiction?
Early intervention and prevention programs are key. Schools can play a vital role by implementing evidence-based drug and alcohol prevention curricula that go beyond just saying, don't do drugs.
Right.
It's about teaching young people about the risks, but also equipping them with healthy coping skills and decision-making strategies.
So giving them the tools to navigate those pressures and temptations we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And we need to equip parents, educators, and community leaders with the tools to recognize early warning signs of substance use and mental health issues so they can intervene early and get young people the support they need before things escalate.
Being proactive, not reactive.
That's right. It's almost like building a safety net, creating a system where young people feel supported and empowered to make healthy choices.
That's a great analogy. And it's important to remember that prevention isn't just about avoiding substance use. It's about promoting overall well-being, building resilience, and fostering a sense of connection and belonging. When young people feel connected and supported, they're less likely to turn to substances in the first place.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating a culture that values mental health and well-being for everyone starting at a young age.
It makes sense.
It's about creating an environment where it's okay to not be okay and where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. That's how we start to break the cycle of addiction and create a healthier future for everyone.
Man, this deep dive into Liam Payne's life and passing has been heavy.
Yeah, it has.
But I think we've uncovered some really important insights going beyond just the headlines and those initial reactions we all had.
For sure. I think it's challenged some common assumptions about addiction and shown just how complex these situations are.
Yeah, it's easy to just brain the individual, but like we've been talking about, it's way more nuanced than that.
Way more.
Yeah.
We have to remember that interplay of biology, psychology, social environment. And we can't forget that relapse, while incredibly painful, is often part of the journey for those battling addiction. It doesn't erase their progress or diminish their efforts.
You're right. And it makes me think about those closest to Liam, his family, his friends, his bandmates, the grief they must be carrying. It's hard to even fathom.
It's truly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It highlights that ripple effect of addiction, how it impacts not just the individual, but their entire support network. Those left behind, they often face their own struggles with guilt, anger, helplessness. It's a heavy burden for everyone involved,
That quote from his mother keeps echoing in my mind. I've lost my beautiful boy. It's such a simple statement, but it carries so much weight.
doesn't it? It reminds us that behind the statistics and the headlines, there's a real person with loved ones whose lives are forever changed.
It's a call for compassion, isn't it? To remember the human element in all of this and approach these conversations with sensitivity and understanding, not just for Liam, but for everyone touched by addiction in any way.
I couldn't agree more. And it reminds us that language matters too. We need to move away from stigmatizing terms and use language that reflects the reality of addiction as a health condition.
It struck me that some of the coverage we've seen used phrases like battling demons or losing the fight when talking about Liam's struggles, and it always feels a bit off.
Yeah, I get that. That kind of language, while maybe coming from a place of concern, can actually be quite harmful. It reinforces this idea that addiction is a moral failing or weakness rather than the complex medical condition it is.
So how can we talk about addiction in a way that's both accurate and compassionate? What kind of language should we be using?
I think we can start by focusing on the facts, avoiding judgmental language, and emphasizing the possibility of recovery.
Right.
Instead of labeling someone as an addict, we can talk about them living with addiction. It's a subtle shift, but it acknowledges their humanity and avoids defining them by their struggles.
It's about recognizing their whole personhood, not just reducing them to their addiction, and highlighting those stories of hope and resilience, showing that recovery is possible.
Exactly. And remember, even in the midst of tragedy, there's always an opportunity for learning and growth. Liam's story, while deeply saddening, can serve as a catalyst for important conversations about addiction and mental health.
Yeah, it can help us break down those barriers of silence and shame.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it can inspire us to challenge stigma, advocate for better access to treatment, and offer support to those who are struggling. Even small actions can make a difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with kind of a mix of emotions, sadness for the loss of a talented young man, but also this feeling of responsibility to do what I can to prevent future tragedies like this.
I think that's a natural response.
Yeah.
It's been a heavy conversation, but an important one, and I hope it encourages our listeners to keep learning, keep asking questions, and engage in meaningful dialogue about addiction and mental health. These conversations, they really do matter.
They do. This is just the beginning of the conversation, not the end. We all have a role to play in creating a more compassionate and understanding world.
And if you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please remember that help is available. You are not alone, and there are resources out there that can provide support.
That's the perfect message to end on. Reach out, seek support, and hold on to hope.